Hello, I'm David Groninger in Seattle, Washington. It's December 3rd, a Thursday night, and it's kind of a little bit rainy, and I just came back from a great walk, and now it's time for me to do my 10-minute message. Each day I make a 10-minute message, hopefully one of which might help 10 million people. And I've decided to give 1,000 talks. I started about a week ago, so I have a little bit of a ways to go, hoping that one out of these 1,000 talks might help 10 million people. I've got my alarm clock set to go off in 10 minutes, so I'm going to start right now. Now this talk, sometimes when you give a message, when you want to convey a principle or a lesson, when you tell a story, it's easy to remember the lesson because you remember the story. And so this particular story takes place in the Old West. And at the end of the story, I'll tell you what the principle is, but you'll probably see the principle, that is the lesson, as it goes on. The story is called Hank and the Water Barrels. That is, Hank and the Water Barrels. And it takes place in about the 1870s in some small little town in New Mexico. And it's very, very hot. It's in the summertime. Normally, they get a little bit of rain this time of year, but the rain is late, and people are concerned because it's dry, they need water. And so coming into town is this guy named Hank, who they never saw before, who has a couple of donkeys in front of a cart that he's, carrying the cart, pulling the cart, and he has a bunch of water barrels in the cart. So he comes into the center of the little town and he tells people, hey, he's got some water, and he hears there's been a drought, so he's going to sell it for like, 5 cents a gallon. And people think, well, that's very fair. So they start buying his water, and they're happy. Some of their livestock have already died. Their flowers are dying. Their little animals and chickens are, almost dead. But now that they have some water, it can help them a little bit. Their wells have run dry, and they just were, they lacked this resource, water. Now they knew that the rains were going to come any day, but the fact that they had not come yet made Hank a very welcome person. So people really like this guy named Hank. For only 5 cents, they get plenty of water. Everybody's happy. So the guy that owns the restaurant decides, hey Hank, why don't you come in? Because you've done a good job for this town, we'll give you a free meal. And the guy that owns the hotel said, hey, we'll give you a free room too. So here's Hank eating dinner. And while he's there, he's talking to some of the people of the town, and he says, one of my skills is I can find water. Maybe I'll buy it from somebody and bring it into a town that, needs water. And that's how I do my business. And he tells them about the place where he got the water. He said it takes about a day to get there, but it'll take 2 days to get back because when you're carrying this heavy load, it takes longer. And he tells them that it's up some type of a small mountain where there's this cave, and in the cave there's this stream, and that's where he gets the water. So this really excites the people, and he invites them to come along with him. He says, hey, and the next day he's going to go early, and everyone just follow him who has a cart, wagons and barrels and horses or whatever. So a lot of people go with him. It takes a day to get there and 2 days to get back, and sure enough, they get back into the town with plenty more water. And because this guy Hank was such a nice guy and led these people to the source of this valued resource, water, and the source of this resource, which was very scarce at this time, they thought, this guy Hank has really done us a good job, so we're going to let Hank sell all his water first before we sell ours to the people of the town. And so people were happy to give Hank his 5 cents. Some gave him 10 cents. Anyway, it all worked out very well, and they decided again that they'd just go again for a few more times. And each time, even more people went. So the town collected quite a bit of a reserve of water, and shortly thereafter, the rains came anyway, so everything was okay. But people really liked this guy Hank, and they decided to invite him, if he wanted to be kind of the water utility guy for the town, and they pay him to kind of manage getting the water, and because of the good that he's done, they wanted to do some good back to him. And everybody won in this situation. Now, the lesson here is there was a particular resource, and it was a scarce resource. And this guy Hank, rather than trying to hide the fact that he knew where the source was or trying to monopolize it all for himself, he decided to share the source of this resource. And it did not hurt him at all, because they let him sell water anytime he wants to, and they even supported him by welcoming him as a great member of this town and a respected member of the town. So the moral of the story, or the lesson, is there's usually a source of the valued resource. And the people who share the source with other people, these are your friends. These are people who can help you prosper. But the people who try to hide where the source of it is, or pretend that they're the source only, well, somehow or another, sometimes it can, make things stagnate. Well, let me give you an opposite story about a similar example, only with a different circumstance. Let's call it Bill and the water barrels. Let's say a guy named Bill in some similar, very, very hot little town in New Mexico comes in with this wagon full of barrels, and it's hot there. They need water. They're happy to pay, but instead of just charging 5 or 10 cents, he charges $1 a gallon. Well, these people are very happy to get the water, so they'll pay the $1, but some do it begrudgingly. But they know that if they don't buy the water, their cows are going to die, their little sheep are going to die, their chickens are going to die, their flowers are going to die. So they pay it. And what do you know? A few days later, Hank comes to the town again with more water, and he says, this is the last of the water, because I actually bought it from some other guy, and he said that was the last of his water, and because there's no more water, this cost $3 a gallon. So people thought $3 a gallon back in the 1870s, that's like paying $300 a gallon now. But because people didn't want their livestock to die, and their little chickens to die, and their flowers to die, they paid the $3 very begrudgingly. And then Hank said, well, thanks, and I appreciate that. I guess that's the end of the water. But sure enough, a few days later, Hank comes by again, and he says, hey, by the way, I found one last guy that had a big load of water, and this was the last water of all the guys that have water, that I'm sure, and since this is the last, I have to charge $6 a gallon. Well, people by this time are getting a little bit upset about all this, even though some people still pay the money because they have to have the water. But because they're kind of suspicious of what's going on with this guy, Bill, and charging so much money, increasing the price every time, one guy decides to follow him to see where he's going. And sure enough, this guy, Bill, when he leaves town, he circles around the town and goes back, and it's a similar place up in the mountains where there's a spring where he can get plenty of water. And when the guy discovers this, that what Bill is doing, he goes back and tells the townspeople, and they all load up their wagons and attach their horses and get their barrels, and they all go there and get plenty of water. And they come back to the town, and now they know how to get water. They have the source of it. And oddly enough, when Bill comes back again, not knowing that they're getting the water too, he tries to sell them water again, and this time they're not going to be fooled by him, because they have the water, and instead they tell him that if he wants to eat at the restaurant, instead of 50 cents for dinner, it's $50. He's going to have to pay $50 if he wants to eat for dinner, and if he wants to stay in the hotel, which is normally $1, it's going to be $100. So in other words, they're not very friendly toward this guy Bill, because they had a high need for a resource, and they had to pay a lot of money just for this resource that they could have had available to them at a much lesser charge. He made them suffer. He made them kind of feel bad. He put a burden on them that he didn't necessarily have to do. And although you say in the business world this is all legal, the fact is there's a little bit of a kind of a law that is underneath the law of business, which is the law of human decency, the law of kindness, the law of long-term relationships with people, where honesty is going to somehow win out in the end every time. So eventually, since everything costs so much for Bill to be in that town, he just leaves and they're happy he's gone. So they now have a source of where they can get their water, and now they're happy, even though they had to pay a lot of money for the experience. So you see in these two little stories, Hank and the water barrel, and Bill in the water barrel, they're very, very similar. Each place had a need for some kind of a resource that fed directly into their livelihood. a needed resource, and a resource that for whatever reason was scarce, maybe unexpectedly, because normally this time of year they get rains, but they didn't get the rains. So the idea of this kind of a message, that there are resources available, and that those who study where the source of these resources are, they can be of great help to other people as they, teach others how to find these resources. My alarm clock going off at 10 minutes. Some of the first talks I gave were like an hour long, and I cannot imagine how boring they must have been. In fact, I sent these talks to a friend of mine that told me to cut them down to even 5 minutes, which maybe I'll do. But that concludes my message. It was a 10-minute message, and the motivation for this is because I have some crazy idea that I can develop a 10-minute message that might help 10 million people. And I don't know which one it's going to be, so I'm going to make 1,000 of them, one each day for 3 years. So each day I ask myself the question, well, David, that's my name, David Groninger. I'll ask myself the question, well, David, so what kind of a message can you give today in 10 minutes that just might possibly help 10 million people? So the message today that came to mind was this story called Hank and the Water Barrels, which is a short story that I actually wrote 15 years ago, but I never have published. So I decided, I'm just going to tell the story as my 10-minute message. And remember the moral of the story. All of our needs that we have, the needs that feed into our vitality, to our happiness, to our will to live, the needs that we have all have a source. And when we study what is the source of our needs, then we can be more self-sufficient and more interdependent, and we can be in a greater position to help others satisfy their needs when we can direct other people to the source of their getting their needs met. We're helping other people to become more empowered and independent, and everything works out well for everybody in this way. So that's been my message today. Hank and the Water Barrels, in some little town in New Mexico in the 1870s. And the idea is there is a source of our needs. Identify that source and build a very flowing conduit from that source into your life. This is David Groninger in Seattle, Washington, saying thank you.